All right, welcome. This is Dave Gilbertson with UKG. I'm here with John Frehse at Ankura. We are back with no suits and no slides. John, it is fantastic to be back talking with you. I've missed our conversations together.
I did. We didn't have you for 3 of them. They felt
Yes.
empty. I don't know what you know. I heard I talked about you in all of them. We're
getting the band back together.
Yes, we are. And we have a lot to talk about today.
We
a
do.
lot.
We
some
do.
good stuff and some not so good stuff. But
It's going to be interesting. So we had a recent jobs report that was honestly a head scratcher, and it kind of highlighted some of the value of the high frequency data that's out there. This has been a big change in how business decisions are being made from a labor standpoint.
And this is November 2021, announced in early December jobs data.
Yes, yeah. Although I think the legs are going to be, they're going to, I think, run for quite a while on this. So let's get right into it. How have you seen out, kind of in your travels as a consultant, how have you seen the data that's out there, the labor data that we've historically had, be used among decision makers?
So we've got a lot of leaders and decision makers, investors, private equity, big corporations looking to grow that are saying, we want to know what's happening with the jobs number. We want to know, are we stabilizing? Are we growing? Is it time to put money back into the market? Not just from an equities perspective, but from building factories and building distribution and supply chain operations. Where do we put the factory? Where are people actually coming back to work? And they rely on the monthly jobs report.
Yeah.
And it's a little terrifying for me because billions of dollars in decisions are being made on something that people really don't understand how this data is collected. It's aggregated. We don't have surgical decisions we can make based on it. And if the information's inaccurate or wrong, we've got a problem anyway. So we have a lot of people hanging on every word from this report, and we really don't know why they are.
It's also based on 2 separate surveys, right? There's one survey of households and basically asking people, are you employed? And then there's a separate survey of establishments or companies asking the companies, how many jobs did you create? Well, those numbers don't always come back in real strong relation to each other. This past month, for example, there were 1.1 million more people employed, and there were 210,000 new jobs created.
How does that work?
Now, I'm not a math major. However, I know enough about this stuff to know that those 2 things don't weave together very well. That's got to make it really difficult to make decisions.
I was an econ and politics double major, so I'm just confused. I
Right.
don't have any answers.
Well, we met before the pandemic, so
thank you.
It's not
So
new.
I have serious concerns, though. Again, our clients are private equity firms, they're large corporations, and they're saying, first of all, what they're saying is, and this goes back to the theme of all of our conversations, we don't want to invest in companies that are labor intensive. And we're not going to invest in companies that have all these people because, frankly, it's a headache. And I think, number 1, that's a mistake. But 2, it leaves an opportunity for companies willing to take that risk to find value where people have left it. And so the key is getting the right information so they can make intelligent investment decisions.
Sure.
So you and I come from 2 different places. You're on the side of basically getting to the truth and getting it out to the population.
Yep.
I'm on the side of consuming that truth and making investment and operational strategy decisions that can drive performance. And so can you do me 2 favors for our audience? Number 1 is talk to us a little bit more about the labor number. Like, what is the jobs report? What is it? Because it's not about how many jobs were really created anyway. Right? If there's 10.1 million open jobs right now, there's lots of jobs. Right? So what is it? Number 2 is there a better alternative? What should we be looking at? And can we make investment-based decisions, growth decisions based on what's going on?
Yeah. So we've seen something very similar to what you saw in talking to folks and actually in looking at our own company at UKG, really struggling to figure out how do we make investment decisions when it comes to people. People is typically the number 1 or number 2 highest expense at almost any company in the whole economy.
And the greatest creator of value.
That's right, and the greatest creator of value, absolutely. And so a lot of companies have looked to this jobs report. So what is the jobs report? Well, there's 2 numbers that come out every month. One is an unemployment number. What % of the population that wants a job actually has a job? And then 2 is how many jobs were created last month? And they're made up of 2 separate surveys, as I mentioned earlier. But the key there is they're surveys. It's going to be a sample. And
who decided to respond?
Exactly. So I don't know about you. I know that whenever I get a call on my phone and the caller ID says spam, I pick it up immediately.
Yes, of course.
Obviously,
you don't want to miss those.
No, absolutely not.
You don't want those.
No, it's become a real challenge because this number, as you pointed out, is being relied on by so many people.
Yep.
And to make literally billions of dollars worth of investment decisions. And throughout the pandemic, I think one of the real benefits that's come out of the pandemic is a lot of private companies have recognized there's a better way to do this than just relying on surveys.
Yep.
And so a lot of companies, UKG included, have started putting out what's begun to be called high-frequency data. And all that is basically a snapshot in time of what's going on the ground right now. We've never
But
had
these are
that
facts.
before.
These
Absolutely
are facts. These are not
fact-driven.
opinions. These are not who decided to respond.
That's exactly
We
right.
know who's punching in and out by industry, by region, and we can, in an anonymous way, say this is what actually happened.
That's exactly right. So that was the conclusion that we came to very early in the pandemic. Was we were trying to figure this out along with everybody else to say, boy, how deep is this going to go? How long is it going to go? And we started recognizing, you know what? We actually, since this is our business, we actually know exactly who was working yesterday.
Yeah.
So we started pulling the data, and we just focused in on time punches. So if you're an hourly employee, and about 65% of us around the country are hourly employees, you're going to be clocking in and clocking out, whether it's a physical time clock or you're punching in and punching out on your phone. One way or the other, you're going to be recording your time. Well, as the leading provider of workforce management software, we know exactly where that's happening all over the country. And we
Huge data set.
Huge data set. It was, once we started pulling the data, we do just over 1 billion, just the data set we're using for this analysis is just over 1 billion time punches per year. So
we've got a really good
gigantic
processor on your laptop.
Exactly. The Excel fan is humming.
Exactly.
Right, the hamsters
Melting
are running. Right. But once we put all of those billions of data points together, boy, did they come up with a chart that made a lot of sense. We could actually see on holidays, people aren't working as much. During the month of
August,
the
right?
end of March, yeah, in August it absolutely goes down.
You had educated on this in another one of our sessions that, hey,
Yeah,
I know August is going to be a problem.
right.
It seems like
right.
nobody else knew August was going to be a problem, but you knew it was going to be a problem.
Exactly, yeah. We knew that the jobs number was going to go down in August because people are taking vacation.
Mhm.
Great, that's good news.
Yep.
So we saw in our data in April of last year just the gigantic turn down, which everybody saw, but not everybody saw how quick it was and how quickly it bounced back. So there were a couple other data sets that came out that are more based on payroll, which is generally a few weeks late, right? If you work today, you're going to get a paycheck for that a few weeks from now. Well, during that time period last spring, that wasn't going to fly, right? That was going to be wildly off. And I think this one high-frequency data set I'm thinking of specifically was off by about 2,000%.
Wow.
Right? When you compare it with the job.
With that dip, it was going to be impossible.
Because it was the last couple weeks in March and the first few weeks in April where everything was going down and then
changes.
going back.
Yep.
Unbelievable
The
changes.
slope of the labor curve was very
Right.
negative and then very positive.
Right. And then all the economists out there realized that the data that was coming out broke their models. They'd never seen this before. So when they got to the May number, they said, well, it was just as bad as April, and so we're in for a lot more pain. We looked at our data and said, no, actually a lot of people were working in May. A lot of people.
Yep.
Didn't bounce back entirely, but a lot of people were working.
And different
sure
industries
enough,
experienced it differently,
That's
and
right.
you knew that.
And we knew that. We
No
were
one
able
else
to
knew
see.
that.
Right? We were able to see at an industry level, at a geographic level, and at a company size level how this affected folks differently. So one example of that was we saw just the decimation that was occurring on Main Street in this country, all over the country. Very small companies with less than 100 employees were shutting down at rates we've never seen before.
You know,
And-
this is one thing that you said, and I've kind of been obsessed with since you talked about it, is the difference in recovery between a small company and a big business.
Mhm.
And there was a real difference, and there remains a big difference there on how they're performing.
That's right. Yes, and so the big companies seem to see that this was a real opportunity for investment, and boy, they plowed investment dollars back into hiring very quickly. So last summer, we had already seen almost a full recovery in most sectors among large companies back to where it was pre-pandemic. not the case, and still not the case for very small companies. They just don't have the cash flow to do it. Those are the kinds of things that you can see play out with high frequency data, and it's just really difficult to see with survey data at that level of granularity. I think in a couple different companies I would throw out there, Indeed has done a great job showing the value of employment data, who's applying for jobs, where they're applying for jobs, what that acceleration is. When you combine that data, which should be an indicator of employment that is coming, along with the UKG data, which is an indicator of who's actually working yesterday, those two data points together are really, really valuable. And that's a great supplement to what the government is putting out, because there's so many challenges and the world is changing in terms of how they respond to surveys. It feels like this next generation of labor reporting and labor productivity reporting is going to be all about combining this private company high frequency data along with the data that the government's putting out.
So I want to talk about uses of the high frequency data. So I think we've got a pretty good grasp on those two different types of numbers and why the workforce activity report is so critical.
Yep.
And it's sort of investment grade intelligence. So I get excited. You're not allowed to say that. I'm allowed to say that. It's spectacular for us. What I think is interesting is, and you and I have not talked about this, is when there's panic in the marketplace that people are not coming back to work, we start to make very aggressive decisions.
Yep.
And those decisions could be around benefits, time off. The big one is pay.
Yep.
And we've talked a lot about pay and how it does or does not move the needle, and how, if you're paying $8 an hour and you get to 15, that might be great. But there's other places like I talked about Allentown, Pennsylvania, where they're now at $26.50 an hour and still isn't moving the needle completely.
Right.
But if people think that workers are not coming back and they're getting jobs reports that say we're in serious trouble, they're going to make large financial decisions that are lasting, hundreds of millions of dollars for a large corporation to say, everybody gets a pay raise, we're going to get more people in here, this is how we're going to attract employees because the jobs number is so terrible, we've got to move the needle. When the reality is, we see in many sectors, based on your investigations, that the jobs numbers are stabilizing. Not everywhere, but in many places. And meanwhile, you don't know this, and you're throwing hundreds of millions of dollars into your payroll.
Right.
It's dangerous.
It's very dangerous, yeah. So there's still 10 million job openings and about 7 to 8 million unemployed. So way more job openings than there are folks that are unemployed. And it feels like the next level of, I think everybody's agreeing this is here to stay, right?
Yes.
We're going to, and I think you've made that point in some earlier videos as well, this labor challenge is here to stay. The real truth is, when you look at some of the data that was published prior to the pandemic, the labor issues, they were kind of out there before the pandemic.
Yeah, they were bad.
This is just accelerating it. So I think companies are going to start doubling down on things like driving greater productivity, changing jobs, using automation in ways that they haven't in the past. That doesn't mean that jobs go away. As we've seen, there's more than enough jobs for anybody that wants a job at this point.
Right.
But the skill sets may be a little bit of a mismatch. So
That's right.
Kind of getting people better trained so that they can take these higher value jobs that are now in the marketplace and that are being demanded, and then also kind of elevating some of the entry level jobs are, I think, in the future actually going to have a higher expectation of responsibility that's going to bring more pay along with it, because a lot of the automated things or repetitive tasks that they're doing aren't needed anymore.
That's right.
And I think it's going to be this combination of, sure, the employees have a lot more power today than they used to, and that's going to stick around for a while. But I think companies are also going to get smart about trying to increase productivity and really elevate the level of entry-level jobs in a way that should be beneficial for employees and beneficial for the economy.
So if we look at stabilizing the workforce return to work, there's not dramatic ups and downs like there were initially. We're hovering. I keep on saying 86% of what we were in February of 2020. Is it a little higher than that now?
Yeah, it's about 90%.
About 90% now. So we're still 10 points shy of where we were.
Yep.
But it's less of the herky-jerky up and down, which is great. And yes, there's things we need to do because we have a shortage no matter what. But please do not make large financial decisions based on panic.
Yeah.
When this has been going on for a long time, and it will be going on for a long time, and it's, as you said, it's not pandemic specific. Although we normalize some of these behaviors based on the pandemic. The living at home. We talked in our first one about 52% of 18 to 29-year-olds living at home with at least one parent. Before the pandemic, it was 47%.
Yep.
And so these have been problems we've had all along. The difference is now it's okay.
Right.
Oh, you're living at home with your parents?
Right.
Me too.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm not living at home with my parents, but just reference. So I just think that's interesting. So the other piece, and we talked about this in the beginning a little bit, is private equity firms are overwhelmingly avoiding labor-centric, labor-focused businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And that's leaving opportunities for those that are willing to take the risk.
Yes.
Now, one help on that is looking regionally at the strength of the workforce and who's come back and maybe where we have some permanent scarring.
Yep.
So do you look at regions and spend time on that at all?
Yeah, we look a little bit at regions. We look more by industry. I would say regionally, with a couple exceptions regionally, this downturn and recovery has treated most regions pretty similarly. I think in the Southeast specifically, they were hit not quite as hard initially, but they then took longer to come back. So, but outside of that, each region of this pandemic has responded in a pretty similar way. Industries, as you mentioned, have responded in wildly different ways. And what we've continued to see is that a lot of the retirements that happened, that kind of got accelerated during the pandemic, happened to be with baby boomers that were highly skilled. And so now all of a sudden, a lot of those jobs that are available are high-skilled jobs that pay very well, but you can't just create that skill overnight. And so that's where I think another element that's leading us to say, this challenge is probably going to be out there for a while. Healthcare is a great example.
Healthcare, manufacturing, and construction are three that you mentioned that now I've included on all my PowerPoint slides. I've stolen all of your stuff. I do quote you. No suits, no slides today, but I do quote you. But yeah, those are scary areas.
Yes, and I think that's going to be here to stay. And then I think this dichotomy of big companies responding more quickly than small companies is another interesting one. I think the area that's been really underreported is this idea that companies are, a lot of the jobs that are available today and will be available a few years from now, the base level of skill is just going to continue to rise. That's going to be a great thing for employees. That's going to increase their paycheck. The expectations and the power that they've got are going to increase their benefits that are standard. This could end up being a good thing for companies and a good thing for employees if we do it right as a country.
And does it...
Sounds like I'm running for office.
No, exactly. Let's do it.
No agenda here.
I'll vote for you.
It's just looking at the data. Thank you.
So for the investors out there, for people that are looking at their own investment strategies moving forward, I would argue maybe that for capital-constrained small to medium-sized businesses, there's opportunities that are great businesses that just don't have the capital where we can actually impact earnings.
Yeah. The irony is that they most likely became great investors by focusing on the data and going where the data guides them. And the guidance I would give them, for what it's worth, is do exactly the same when you're looking at labor data.
But you better have the right data.
Absolutely.
There's lots of data that's wrong.
Yeah,
is the problem. So we've got to get the right stuff. All right, I want to end on one final question for you, which is, there's a lot of demographics you look at, and you've been tracking women 45 to 55, and I mean this in a responsible data way. You've been tracking that demographic.
Mm-hmm.
And are people leaving? Is it still that group that's leaving the workforce? Is it 45 to 55? I may have it wrong.
Yeah. So I think it was actually, there were two separate groups that we saw purely through the government data. Actually, we're trying to get our own data to try to verify it and supplement it. But the government has released some very solid demographic data, and they were showing that actually folks really early in their careers were taking a break if they were under a lot of stress during the pandemic. A lot of those are hourly employees that are working directly with the public, and just from a healthcare standpoint didn't want to do that anymore. And the second big group of people that have just left the workforce is generally mothers that are kind of in their late 40s to early 50s that have left with family pressures, and in a lot of cases we think have decided to retire. So they're kind of put in the early retirement bucket.
This is a huge demographic in healthcare.
Absolutely.
And so we should be terrified.
We should be. I agree. It's not necessarily nurses inside hospitals, although we're starting to see a little bit more of that. It's more some of the aides that are working at rehab facilities, at non-acute and post-acute facilities. It's The
long-term care though is a problem too. They can't find anybody.
Really difficult, really challenging.
A lot of bankruptcies in that space.
That's right. Yeah.
So,
at a time when there really shouldn't be. So I think those are the two groups we're paying the most close attention to that seem to have the labor participation go down the most is females specifically, early in their career and later in their career. That's going to take a long time to come back from just as an economy. We need those folks back in the labor force at some point.
And does that set a trend where, hey, I work until I'm 44, 45, and then we become a single income family again?
Right.
So, in conclusion, bringing us home, as the man with the plan, with all the data, what's the summary here?
I think the summary is the way to look at some of the labor data that's been coming out is, as with everything, gather as much data as you can. There is some fantastic high frequency data out there from companies like UKG and Indeed. Combine it with the data that's coming out from the government. We should be in good shape. Don't just use one of those data sources like a lot of us have done in the past. I think coming out of this pandemic, the most effective investors are going to be those that are able to combine this combination of what's really happening on the ground right now, along with some of the more directional data coming out of surveys.
Long-term trends.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yep.
David Gilbertson,
Always
thank you
fun.
so much.
Always fun.
Great to do it again.
Sounds good.